Hello there, friends. Come on up. Don't be shy. The wind is biting a little bit today, isn't it? It's that sharp kind of cold that nips at your nose and makes your eyes water. It reminds me of the winter of 1959. Go ahead, pull up a rocking chair. I've got the coffee pot inside, but I think this story is best told out here in the fresh air. Today, I want to take you back to a very specific moment in time. I want to take you back to a world that was perfect, or at least perfectly symmetrical. You see, for most of my childhood and for most of your grandparents' lives, the United States was a finished puzzle. We had 48 states. It was a nice, even number, 4 dozen. When you looked at the American flag, you saw 6 neat rows of 8 stars. It was balanced. It was orderly. It was comfortable. We recited the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in school, looking at that flag. We knew exactly what the map looked like. It was a big rectangle in the middle of North America. We had the Atlantic on one side, the Pacific on the other, Canada upstairs, and Mexico downstairs. Simple. But history, my friends, doesn't like to stay simple. History likes to shake things up. And on January 3rd, 1959, history shook us up good. That was the day Alaska officially became the 49th state. Now, you might think, well, Pop, that's just politics. Why does that matter to a regular kid? Oh, let me tell you, it mattered. It mattered because it ruined everything in our classroom. Let me paint the picture for you. Imagine a classroom in 1959. The floors are wooden and squeaky. The air smells like pencil shavings, chalk dust, and those wet wool coats drying by the radiator. In the front of the room, above the chalkboard, was the pull-down map. You know the kind I'm talking about? It was like a window shade. The teacher, Mrs. Higgins, bless her heart, she was older than the Constitution itself. She would grab that metal ring at the bottom and pull it down with a loud snap. And there it was, the United States. The lower 48, as we call them now. But back then, we didn't call them the lower 48. We just called them the United States. Alaska wasn't on that map. Or if it was shoved into a tiny little box in the bottom corner, floating somewhere near Arizona, shrunk down to the size of a postage stamp. It looked small. It looked insignificant. It was just a frozen territory where we bought our canned salmon from. But on January 3rd, everything changed. President Eisenhower signed a piece of paper, and suddenly that frozen icebox was family. I remember walking into school that Monday after the news broke. The mood was confused. Mrs. Higgins looked stressed. She stood in front of the class, tapping her long wooden ruler against her palm. "Class," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Today, our country has grown." She explained that Alaska was now a state, a real state, just like Ohio or New York or California. Now, for us kids, this raised a lot of logistical questions. The first one was, where do we put it? You see, we had assignments where we had to draw the map of the USA. We were experts at drawing the shape of Florida and the curve of Texas and the bumpy coast of Maine. But Alaska was huge. I remember Tommy Miller raising his hand. Tommy was the class clown, but he asked a serious question. "Mrs. Higgins," he asked, "if Alaska is a state now, do we have to draw it connected to Washington State?" We all looked at the map. There was Canada, sitting right there in the way. A huge chunk of Canada separated us from our new brother. It felt strange. It was like having a bedroom in your neighbor's house. You're part of the family, but you sleep down the street. Mrs. Higgins sighed. "No, Tommy, Alaska is separated by Canada, but it is politically part of us." Then came the second problem, the size. This is where the story gets really funny, especially if you have any friends from Texas. You see, before 1959, Texas was the king. Texas was the biggest state in the Union. They were proud of it. Everything was bigger in Texas. They had the biggest hats, the biggest belt buckles, and the biggest land. It was a huge part of their identity. But when Alaska walked in the door, oh boy, Alaska didn't just beat Texas. Alaska swallowed Texas. You could fit 2 whole Texases inside Alaska and still have room left over for Rhode Island. I remember reading a joke in the newspaper around that time. It said that if Alaska didn't stop growing, they were going to cut it in half, and then Texas would be the 3rd largest state. The Texans didn't think that was very funny, but up here in the north, we thought it was hilarious. But the biggest crisis, the thing that really confused us kids, was the flag. The American flag is a sacred thing. It's a symbol of unity. And visually, the 48-star flag was perfect. It was a grid. 6 times 8 equals 48. It was easy to count. It was easy to sew. When they announced a 49th state, I remember looking at the flag in the corner of our classroom and thinking, where are they going to put the extra star? You can't just squeeze it in. If you add 1 star to a perfect rectangle, you ruin the lines. It would look lopsided. There were actually contests held all over the country. School children, housewives, artists, everyone was sending drawings to the White House with ideas for the new flag. Some people drew the stars in a circle. Some drew them in the shape of a big star. Some people just said, "Put the extra one in the middle." Finally, President Eisenhower chose a design. It was clever. It had 7 rows of 7 stars. 7 times 7 is 49. But here's the catch, and this is a detail a lot of people forget. The 49-star flag is one of the rarest flags in American history. Do you know why? Because of Hawaii. You see, everyone knew Hawaii was waiting in line too. They were knocking on the door. So, the 49-star flag was only official for 1 single year, from July 4th, 1959 to July 4th, 1960. By the time most schools had bought the new flags with 49 stars, Hawaii joined the club, and we had to throw them all away and buy 50-star flags. My father was a frugal man. He hated spending money if he didn't have to. I remember him complaining at the dinner table. "Why couldn't they just wait?" he grumbled, stabbing his potatoes. "Why couldn't they let Alaska and Hawaii come in together? Then we'd go straight from 48 to 50. We'd save a fortune on flags." He had a point. But politics doesn't wait for flag manufacturers. So, for that one strange transitional year, we lived in a 49-star country. But let's talk about what Alaska actually meant to us. Why was it such a big deal? Before 1959, Alaska was a mystery. We knew about the gold rush, of course. We read Jack London's stories about wolves and snow and brave men yelling "mush" to their sled dogs. To a kid in the suburbs, Alaska felt like a different planet. It was the last frontier. In the 1950s, America was becoming very modern. We had supermarkets and highways and television sets and big tail fins on our cars. Everything was becoming paved and polished and plastic. But Alaska represented something wild. It represented the idea that there was still untamed land out there, mountains that had never been climbed, forests that had never been cut. When it became a state, it felt like we were inheriting a sense of adventure. I remember a magazine arrived at our house. Maybe it was National Geographic or Life magazine, and it had a big spread about the new state. I lay on the living room rug, looking at those pictures, glaciers the size of cities, bears standing in rivers catching salmon, the northern lights dancing in the sky like green ghosts. It sparked something in my imagination. I think it sparked something in the whole country's imagination. We were in the middle of the Cold War. We were worried about the Soviet Union. We were building bomb shelters. And suddenly, here was this massive, beautiful wild land that belonged to us. It was a breath of fresh, freezing air. Of course, for the people living in Alaska, it was about more than just romance. It was about rights. They had been fighting for statehood for years. They wanted to vote for president. They wanted to stop being treated like a colony. On that day, January 3rd, there were huge bonfires in cities like Anchorage and Fairbanks. They burned an effigy of colonialism. They danced in the streets in 20 below zero weather. Can you imagine being so happy that you dance outside when it's 20 degrees below zero? That is the Alaskan spirit. Back in my classroom, things eventually settled down. Mrs. Higgins got a new map. It was shiny and smelled like vinyl. This one had Alaska printed correctly in the corner, but it was bigger now. We learned to spell Juneau. We learned that Mount McKinley, which they call Denali now, was the tallest mountain in our country. And the flag? Well, we eventually got the 50-star flag, the one you see today. The perfect pattern returned, 5 rows of 6 and 4 rows of 5. Balance was restored, but I'll never forget that brief window of time, that awkward, exciting year of the 49th star. It taught me something important. It taught me that a country isn't finished. It's not a painting that you hang on the wall and never touch again. It's a living thing. It grows. It changes. Sometimes it gets a little messy. Sometimes the map doesn't look symmetrical. Sometimes you don't know where to sew the star. But that's okay. That's how you make room for new family. So tonight, when you look at a map of the USA, don't just look at the big block in the middle. Look up. Look way up to the top left corner. Look at that wild, beautiful giant. And remember the day when the classroom map changed forever, and Texas had to settle for second place. That's the story for today, folks. It's a simple one, but it's a piece of who we are. Now, before you go running off to check your own maps, I've got a little challenge for you. You know the drill. It's time to wake up those brain cells. Are you ready for the Brain Prime quiz? Let's see how well you were listening. Question number 1. I mentioned that before Alaska joined, the U.S. flag had a specific number of stars that lasted for a very long time. How many stars were on the flag during my childhood before 1959? Think back to the perfect grid. Question number 2. Which state was very unhappy about Alaska joining the Union because it meant they were no longer the largest state? Hint, they wear big hats and have big belt buckles. Question number 3. Why is the 49-star flag so rare? Why did we use it for only 1 year? Who was waiting right behind Alaska to join the club? Take a second. Think about it. Put your answers in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you enjoyed this trip back to the classroom of 1959, do old Pop Pop a favor. Click that subscribe button. It helps us keep the fire going and the stories flowing. Until next time, keep your chin up, keep your eyes open, and stay warm. Bye-bye now.